people that are just, I guess, getting into podcasting, and maybe they're having some doubts, I would just say, just go ahead and try it. You never know what you're going to be good at. A lot of the fears, it's just, mental blocks, right? Like it's your mind making up things. Once you do it, typically those fears will reside. And if you do an episode or two and you really realize like this isn't for me, then that's okay. At least you realized that this might not be my thing. I should pursue something else, and maybe you'll be a lot better at that. But you shouldn't let those fears stop you from at least starting.
This is Find Joy with Joyan Season 2, where joy gets stronger, our community gets bigger, and together we become better versions of ourselves in a world full of limitless possibilities. I'm your host, Joyan Chan. And every Wednesday, we bring you inspiring stories that will light up your soul, powerful message that will make you go wow, and fun conversations that will crack you up. With me and my special guests and friends, it is my personal mission to empower you to live and lead a life with joy. If you are new here, this podcast is for you. If you are looking for more joy, courage, passion, and purpose in your life, we dive deep into mindset mastery, spirituality, love and relationship matters, and how to manifest more success and abundance in all aspects of your life, however that looks. This podcast has got your back every step of the way. Now, without further ado, get ready to laugh, learn, and live your life to the fullest. Joining us today is the host of the Curious Expression podcast, who considers himself to be a lifelong learner. He started the show to not only learn and expand his own knowledge, but to give his listeners information that they can then implement into their own lives too. Some of his favorite topics to talk about include science, self-help, and spirituality. He has also got a healthy curiosity about other areas like the paranormal and UFOs. And what sets him apart is his honest curiosity about his guests and their niches. He recognizes that genuine conversations require genuine curiosity, and his goal is to have real conversations to find real answers that we can all implement into our daily lives. And he's here today to help you embark on a journey to learn something new or brush up on a familiar topic. So guys, help me welcoming the host of the Curious Expression podcast, Pinder Singh. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joanne. Pleasure to be here. Happy to be on the show.
So thank you so much for joining us today, early in your morning at 6 o'clock. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much for doing this. So, like I said with you earlier, I always love having another host on the show to talk about just like having, two podcasters having a conversation, co-creating an episode together. That is always really exciting to me. So can you tell us a bit about your journey, how you got started and why did you start a podcast and what inspired you to take the leap?
So I've basically been a lifelong learner my entire life. I've always been curious about things. And a couple years ago, podcasting kind of grew in popularity. And so I started watching podcasts, and I kind of thought to myself, this would be something interesting to do. It could be a learning opportunity, not just for myself, but for my listeners as well. And so I had always wanted to start a podcast. Life was just really busy a couple years ago, and so I didn't really have the time and energy and stuff. But eventually I got to a point in my life where I did kind of have that time and that I guess shift in mindset where I kind of got over a couple of fears that I had as well. For example, just speaking on camera, things like that. If you've never done it, it can be a little challenging at first. So last year in September, I had my 31st birthday, and just kind of had this mental shift where I was like, okay, gotten into my 30s. It's now or never. And so I kind of got over my fears and just basically decided that this was something that I wanted to really pursue. Um, and so the podcast is called Curious Expression. Basically, it's about bringing on guests that are experts in certain fields and just basically having conversation with them and to kind of learn from them. So that way I can kind of maybe implement some of their expertise in my own life. And more importantly, so my listeners can also benefit, learn something, and hopefully it makes their life better.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like we have quite a similar journey as to, our podcast journey, because I remember when I started my podcast, also I just wanted to learn and have, interview other people, experts in their field, and just invite them to the show and talk to them, ask them a bunch of questions. And in that way I can learn and I can expand and grow. I thought that is amazing, why not, right? So yeah, I started my podcast and I'm now helping others to start their podcast as well. That's really like I found my passion is to help other people start their podcast. And so often, like you said, when so many people want to start a podcast today, right? Let's be honest. But again, so many people don't start a podcast because of some of the fears that you mentioned. Could be being in front of camera or imposter syndrome, which is a big one. So what would you tell aspiring podcaster or people who are new? Because I think you have been, how long have you been podcasting?
So it's been about 6 or 7 months now.
Wow, yeah. I mean, so many people quit, right? After 3 episodes, that is the average. So what would you tell aspiring podcaster or people who are still new? What are some of your advice?
Yeah, so people that are just, I guess, getting into podcasting, and maybe they're having some doubts, I would just say, just go ahead and try it. You never know what you're going to be good at. Um, a lot of the fears, it's just, mental blocks, right? Like it's your mind making up things. Once you do it, typically those fears will reside. And if you do an episode or two and you really realize like this isn't for me, then that's okay. At least you realized that, this might not be my thing. I should pursue something else, and maybe you'll be a lot better at that. But you shouldn't let those fears stop you from at least starting.
Mm.
And I would, recommend just starting off small. So, like when I started, I just used whatever equipment was around, whatever camera was in my laptop. I used my Apple headphones for audio and listening. And so, you don't have to like buy a whole bunch of expensive equipment just to start. You can do your first with some more basic equipment, and that'll kind of get the ball rolling, and then that'll let you realize, okay, is this something you want to pursue long term or not? Is it for you? Um, and seek out assistance. If you know anybody that is a podcaster, maybe get some advice from them. They can maybe help you jumpstart your podcasting career. Check out books or online videos to kind of help you. If you aren't good at communication, maybe take a communication class, develop yourself. So that way you can kind of do the podcasting. But yeah, that's kind of advice I guess I would give to somebody that's just starting. And if your first episode doesn't go well, that doesn't necessarily mean you're bad at it or that you need to quit. Nobody's good on their first episode, right? And it's a learning process. And if you just stick with it, eventually you'll get to a good point.
Yeah, I love that piece of advice because it's about getting started. It's about giving yourself a chance to try, right? And since you have been podcasting for 6 months, what has been the most rewarding part of having a podcast?
Yeah, so for me, as somebody that's a lifelong learner, I would say the most rewarding part has just been learning from other individuals. So I've had a broad range of guests. So my podcast doesn't have like a specific niche where I'm only inviting, like, let's say, scientists on the show, or I'm only inviting cooks. It's a broad range of individuals with different backgrounds, different expertise. And so I guess the biggest thing I've gotten out of the podcast so far is just honestly being able to learn from such a wide range of people.
And how do you usually decide, which topics do you want to explore next with your guests? Like, how do you do that research?
Yeah, so I mean, I have some general interest. I think you mentioned them earlier in the show, like spirituality, self-development. So those are kind of like, I guess, indicators that I look at either when I'm pursuing a guest or a guest has reached out to me asking to be on my show. I kind of see like, okay, does this person kind of fit into these categories? Are they somebody that kind of pushes themselves? Is this somebody I could learn from? Things like that. Um, but sometimes it's not a topic I'm familiar with. For example, I had an individual on, his name was Simon. He's computer science, but I did the research beforehand and had a great conversation with him.
Yeah, I was listening to your one of your latest podcasts, I believe, with Michelle. Sorry, I cannot remember her name, but I think it was she
Michelle
talked.
Hoffman.
Yeah, Michelle Hoffman. She talks about dating, love, and relationship. I was like so hooked. I love the episode. So thank you so much for putting out amazing content out there. So your podcast goal is to provide information that listeners can apply to their own lives, as also your own interests, right? So do you have a memorable moment or how a guest story or what they say to you on the show, what they shared with you has impacted you personally?
Um, I had a conversation, I believe it was my third episode, if I recall correctly. It was with an individual named Noah Healy. He's basically he's somebody that does mathematics for fun. I forget what his exact profession was, but basically he's also into game theory. So game theory is basically where you study how individuals will do kind of like cost benefit analysis when they're going into situations. And so he and I had a funny conversation where he was talking about game theory, and I kind of brought up couples and how, sometimes when you're in a relationship, one person is kind of deciding, do I want to give a little bit more or not give? For example, if you're going to like an event, like let's say a baseball game, maybe the husband likes baseball, but the wife doesn't like baseball. And so how do you kind of negotiate, where do we go and all that stuff? Where do we go for dinner? And so he and I had a fun conversation, and I really liked that one because it's something that I could immediately apply. I'm married myself.
Mm.
And so it was kind of interesting to hear his thoughts about how to kind of maximize your own happiness while also kind of, I guess, making the whole situation fair. So that was really interesting conversation that I had.
Well, that sounds really interesting. I'm gonna listen to that one. So I know you are also a spiritual, I would say, seeker. Where are you in your spiritual journey right now?
I would consider myself what's called a Sikh. So Sikh or Sikhism is a religion that comes from the northwestern part of India. And I haven't practiced it all my life. Early in my life, I was not at least a practicing Sikh, and I didn't have a lot of knowledge about Sikhism. It wasn't until about my college years, so I would say early 20s, when I really got into my traditional heritage and learned about the tradition that I come from. And so that's when I really got into Sikhism. Um, I would say that I'm just, I guess, in the baby steps.
Mm.
I do have a lot of knowledge about Sikhism. Like I could tell you about Sikh history and Sikh, I guess, philosophy and all the beliefs and all that stuff. But I haven't really taken like, I guess, the steps like the serious steps to where you're like really really following a lot of the tenets. um but yeah, I mean, spiritually I would say I'm a pretty spiritually aware individual. I've looked into other religions as well. So prior to Sikhism, my spiritual journey actually started with Christianity, and that was just because the people that were around me in my small town just happened to be mostly Christians and Catholics, and so that's where I kind of first started learning about like God and things like that. And so I have, knowledge about like Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, a little bit of Islam as well. But I would say my main sort of faith or spiritual practice that I follow is Sikhism.
Okay. So Sikhism, what? Yeah, you mentioned you can talk about it. So what is the biggest, I would say, one of the biggest teaching or philosophies that you can share with us, our listeners today?
Yeah, so I guess the number one philosophy or idea in Sikhism is this idea of oneness. So basically, our tradition teaches us that the universe was basically started by one being. So it's a monotheistic religion in the sense that it believes that there's one God. Um, but it kind of differs a little bit from Abrahamic faiths, where it teaches that God created the universe and is also a part of that universe. So God is both transcendent, but also part of creation. And the purpose of that is basically to facilitate this idea that everything is one, that God God exists, but is also part of this creation. And so there's never really a separation from God. Everything is one, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I heard of oneness, but it's not really from Sikhism, right? I mean, I would say it's a general topic that people talk about the universe, God, or like one, we are all one, right? Energy, right? Because I am a free thinker, I don't have any religion, and I believe the universe, right? And but I believe we are all one, right? We are all being created by the higher power, the higher source. Yeah, I didn't know it talks about oneness. And that, is a I would say aligns with what I believe in as well. Yeah, so thanks for sharing. So back to your podcast, how often do you publish an episode? Because I want my listeners to listen to your show as well.
Yeah, so I and then sometimes it ends up being bi-weekly. So there are weeks where I get a little bit too busy and I'm not able to publish an episode. But I do try to stay consistent as much as possible. So you'll see a new episode usually weekly or bi-weekly.
I know I you kind of mentioned this, but like because here's why I asked that question is because as a podcaster, especially when we have been podcasting for so many years or even months, right? Sometimes the topics are repeated, and sometimes I have this guest, let's say he talks about energy healing, right? Then I have a lot of other guests also talk about energy healing, and after a while I feel like I'm getting the same answer, and which is okay, right? It is a reassurance that this is what it is about, right? And but as a curious as the host of the curious expression, how do you remain curious when it's about the same topic and you are getting similar answers? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah. So I guess what I would try to do, well, one thing I try to do is I try to raise them up to then share a little bit more and get a little bit deeper in the conversation, right? So that's how that's like, I guess, a technique that I use to get different answers from people because once they feel comfortable, they'll, maybe explore other avenues, right? Whereas if I were to just bring them on and kind of ask them like, oh, what do you think about science or whatever, right? They might just give the generic answer or something like that. So that's something that I try to do is kind of get that personal connection first or at least throughout the podcast. So that way that opens up the guests to go into different avenues. Um, I try to bring different questions to the show as well. So if it's somebody that, you know, is a topic that I've discussed before with another guest, I try to change up the questions a little bit so that way I do kind of get a slightly different conversation.
Yeah, that is really good tip. I mean, thanks for sharing. So yeah, is there anything else that you really want to talk about? Perhaps I didn't ask you or didn't let you.
Um, yeah, so I guess I would just mention I do have a healthy, I think you highlighted a bit in my intro. So UFOs, for those anybody that doesn't know, it's just basically when somebody sees something in the sky that they can't identify. Traditionally, a lot of people associate that with like aliens, for example. Like people believe that, oh, if I see something in the sky that I can't see, maybe there's some kind of creature or being from a different planet. I don't necessarily make that jump where, oh, if I see something in the sky that I don't know what it is, it must be a traveler from a different universe or something. I don't necessarily make that jump. But it is something that I'm curious about only because so many people see things in the sky that they can't always explain, and sometimes these people are trained individuals, right? So like for example military people, right? People that have training and know the difference between seeing a bird in the sky or seeing a plane in the sky or any other kind of vehicle, right? So when those types of individuals say, hey, I was on a mission or something and I saw something fly by, I couldn't identify it, that's where I'm more so interested in, is when a trained professional tells me, hey, I saw something weird in the sky. I can't explain it. What is that, right? And sometimes it seems like the United States government is not always open with the U.S. public in sharing that their pilots are seeing um, unidentified objects in the sky. And I was saying that they, most likely have good reasons for that. For example, they don't want maybe adversaries to potentially know that we're seeing things in the sky that we can't explain, because that could indicate to the world that the United States military maybe doesn't necessarily have a good grasp for security or whatever, right? It could also be that they don't want the public to panic, right? They don't want United States citizens to know that, hey, there's things in the sky that we can't protect them from, right? So they might have their reasons, whatever they are. But yeah, I mean, this is a subject that I really like, just because it's so kind of mysterious. It's been around at least going back to the 1940s. I personally had an experience where I saw something in the sky, and I was looking up at the sky, and there was this area where there was kind of like two clouds with like a gap in the middle, and I basically saw something come out of these cloud on the right side uh, to the cloud on the left. It was in that gap for me to kind of see what it looked like at least. And it basically looked like it was round, and it looked like it had like pink and yellow lights on it. Now again, I don't know what it was, and again, I'm not making that jump. I'm not saying it was somebody visiting from a different universe or planet or whatever. It was just something that I saw and I couldn't explain it, right? Which kind of makes it a UFO, an identified flying object. And so that's kind of where my curiosity first kind of began for that subject. I just got really curious, like, oh, what did I see? And do other people see things like this? And it turns out that they do. And there's a lot of documentaries out there that talk about people seeing things that they can't explain. Now sometimes they go a little bit weird into, like, I guess, like called the weird section, where people say that they saw people come out of these objects, or that at night they got abducted, things like that. Again, that's not something I subscribe to personally. I think a lot of times, sometimes that's more of like a psychological um matter that's going on, where maybe they need to get I'll say psychiatric help maybe. But as far as just objects in the sky, that's what I'm mostly interested in. And recently, for anybody that knows or doesn't know, I guess, there were three individuals that actually went in front of U.S. Congress members, and they told their stories about what they knew about the subject and their own personal experiences. Those three individuals were Commander Fravor, Ryan Graves, and a guy named David Grush. They basically shared their stories about how they had seen certain objects, or at least heard of other individuals in their department seeing these things, and that they basically could not explain what these objects were and how they behaved in the ways that they did. And it was really interesting to see people with such high military backgrounds come in front of U.S. congressmen, swear an oath, and basically tell their stories. So that was really big for the subject. It was the first time that people had uh, you know gone in front of Congress like that, Congress members, and really shared that, hey, there is something going on, and we need to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, well, that you got me really curious now. So you see, I have an idea for you. I think your podcast, right? You mentioned your podcast don't really have a niche right now. I think since you are so passionate and curious about UFO and things that we couldn't explain, right? I think you could dedicate your podcast to UFOs, to talking about UFOs, interview people who have seen it and they couldn't explain it, yeah, their experience, their stories, or even the news. I think you would be really like, it's like, I don't think there's any podcast out there that talks about UFO. I think you will be the first one, and you're gonna make it big. Because I think that's really like really, really interesting. Maybe you can think about that.
I'll consider it.
Yeah, I think it will be really fun. So yeah. So thank you so much again for coming. And we always end our show with final five rapid fire questions. So these are the five questions that I ask all my guests at the end of the show. And every question has to be answered in either one word or one sentence maximum.
Okay,
All right. Are you
I'll try my
ready?
best. Yeah.
The first question is, what is one thing you wish you knew earlier?
One thing I wish that I knew earlier
Yes. So the question is, what is one thing you wish you knew earlier?
about podcasting.
About anything in life, anything,
Yeah. So one thing that I wish I knew earlier is I wish I knew about Sikhism earlier in my life.
right? That is beautiful. Right. The second question, if you could live your life all over again, what would you do differently?
I would play more sports when I was younger.
What kind of sports?
I would have really liked to have played tennis more.
Wow, tennis. And why not now? Are you playing tennis now?
Not regularly.
Okay, right. The third question, what is something you're trying to learn or curious about right now?
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah, you're so on trend. The next question, if you have 5 minutes and the entire world is listening to you, what would you say?
Remember to love each other.
I love that. That is beautiful. And the last question is, what brings you the greatest joy?
God.
Wow, powerful. Thank you so much for answering all the questions. I have so much fun talking to you today, and thank you so much again for coming to our show today early in your morning. Now, our listeners are across the world, so tell them what is the best place to connect with you and listen to your podcast.
Yeah, so I would start with my website, curiousexpression.com. From there, you can listen to the podcast as well as see my social links, which will take you to like my Instagram, Twitter page, Facebook, all that good stuff, and my YouTube channel.
Yeah. All right, guys. I'll put all the links in the show note below. So make sure you visit the show note and give him a follow, listen to his podcast. And also, thank you so much for listening today. Remember to hit the follow and subscribe button whenever you listen to this podcast. And if you love the show, remember to leave us a review on Apple if you haven't already, so I can thank you personally. I wish you all a joyful and amazing day ahead. Bye. Thank you again for tuning into Find Joy Joyan podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, take a screenshot and share it on your IG story and tag Find Joy Joyan _podcast so I know you are listening. And leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts if you haven't already done so. And remember to hit the subscribe button whether you are listening on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, or any of your other favorite platforms. If you love what we are doing and want to become one of our sponsors, you can send me a DM to connect. And thanks for being here. I will see you soon in the next episode.